Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask a question which I'm going to flip in right here, and wow, this is one of those complex questions. He basically wants to know if prolonged overeating can lead to things like fatty liver, liver toxicity, organ damage, things like that, and kind of just to understand these things and understand what's going on there, kind of how this stuff is linked together. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing. Let's do a little bit of crafting and talk about it, because you know what, guys? This gets complicated really quickly because there's a lot of debates in nutrition circles, medical circles about this stuff. This is not fully agreed upon stuff yet. But there does seem to be, there's an enormous correlation between overeating, obesity, insulin resistance, and fatty liver. Now, the problem we get into is how much of it is debated is what comes first, the chicken or the egg. And I think it's a whole combination of it where different things feed back into each other in a negative way until they spiral out of control. And here's what I mean. We know that insulin resistance is linked to obesity. We know that insulin resistance itself can make obesity happen even faster for a number of reasons. We also know that being obese contributes to insulin resistance. So it's kind of like these different things feed into each other. But as far as actual, like he's talking about hepatotoxicity, he basically means toxicity to the liver. An example that most of you would think of as things that are hepatotoxic is drinking alcohol. Your liver can handle a certain amount of alcohol without any negative problems. Your liver is there to filter toxins out of your body. It's really, really good at it. You can handle a certain amount of aspirin, a certain amount of Tylenol. When you exceed that threshold, your liver starts having problems, just like with alcohol. Chronic excessive exceeding of that. Now, there are certain foods that contribute to both fatty liver and insulin resistance. We know that fructose, the sugar fructose, which those are not familiar with, there's trace amounts found in fruit. And when we're talking about fructose, we're not talking about people eating huge amounts of fruit. It's really hard to eat enough fruit to really get excessive fructose intake. You could do it, but it's not particularly easy to do. But it's real easy to do with sugary drinks. It's real easy to do with refined sugars. It doesn't mean that fructose is any less dangerous in any form. It's just a matter of how much is in there. Just like it's far easier to get an excessive amount of alcohol drinking pure whiskey than it is by drinking wine coolers. And that's the difference. Most of us can understand that. So what you're talking about there, fructose, for example, causes fatty liver in excess, and that excess seems to be around 50 grams of fructose a day. Well, to put that in perspective, table sugar, about 50% of the carbs in table sugar are fructose, and high fructose corn syrup, hence the term high fructose, is about 55% of the calories or carb grams in there are fructose. The research out there tends to show that around 50 grams of chronic fructose intake every day for prolonged periods of time causes both insulin resistance and definitely has a toxicity effect on the liver. In fact, that's the equivalent of being an alcoholic on your liver as far as the data we've seen. In fact, children who are given excessive sugar as small children, you start seeing them with fatty liver. You start seeing them develop diabetes because these things go together. And the interesting thing there is that there are other foods that contribute to insulin resistance as well. Saturated fat in excessive amounts. And here's what we're talking about, guys. We're not ever talking about balance. We're not talking about moderation. That's the thing. When we talk about saturated fat being bad, or we talk about fructose being bad, that doesn't mean any amount is bad. That means an excessive amount is bad. Just like no one who drinks in moderation gets excessively drunk and passes out and has all these other problems. No one who drinks in moderation has a fatty liver and gets hepatitis in their liver and everything from it. People don't have these problems from moderation. The problem is that when you start talking about obesity and gaining large amounts of weight for extended periods of time, moderation has gone out the window. That's no longer moderation. And when you're taking in all those excessive calories, if you're not watching what you eat, you could end up getting your 50 grams of fructose every day. You could also end up exceeding the safe amount of saturated fat. Now, we don't have standards on saturated fat in the United States, but we did when I lived in the UK, and they recommended a maximum saturated fat intake of 30 grams of saturated fat per day for men, and I think it was 25 for women. Their NHS even recommended that. They felt that above that, there was a strong link to health problems. Does that mean automatically everyone who does it's going to have health problems? No. People on ketogenic diets do fine on it. taking in those amounts. But what happens when you start taking in those amounts while mixing them with carbs or refined carbohydrates or a large caloric excess? People start developing insulin resistance. There seems to be a strong link between insulin resistance and saturated fat. There's a strong link between excessive fructose intake and fatty liver and insulin resistance. Well, those things tend to feed into each other also. When people become insulin resistant, they tend to develop more visceral fat around their organs. Visceral fat around organs is linked with organ damage. Visceral fat around organs is very much linked with multiple forms of mortality. You're simply going to live a much shorter life with far more health problems if you have extra visceral fat around your organs. Any excessive overeating or becoming obese can contribute to that. However, the types of foods that you eat do affect the rate of it, meaning a person could gain 30 pounds of fat who does certain types of exercise, physical activity, and one composition of a diet and gain 30 pounds of fat while being sedentary and eating a different composition diet, and there's going to be a dramatic difference in how much visceral fat they both gain around their organs. People who are very physically active, who are athletic, are going to gain less. People who are consuming diets that don't have a lot of saturated fat or a lot of fructose in them are going to have less visceral fat around their organs with the amount of fat gain that they gain. Now, the interesting thing with all of this is that once we start consuming these foods in excess that cause insulin resistance, we run into other problems, because obviously we know caloric excess contributes to obesity. That's the number one factor. I mean, calories in, calories out, your number one factor. But what about the hormonal effects in the long term? This is what we're looking at. Insulin resistance itself contributes to more overeating and less activity. And that's the other thing that we need to look at. So we say, yeah, there's a calories in, calories out is everything, but what causes these things? Very simple. People who have insulin resistance, their body needs more insulin to shuttle the foods they eat into their muscle cells, into a lot of their organs and everything. Therefore, it produces more insulin. You have a larger insulin response. It causes that. The larger insulin response can contribute more to visceral fat around your organs. It can contribute to more insulin resistance. What also happens with that, with the increased insulin, is that you have larger fluctuations in blood sugar. People who get large spikes in blood sugar and then large drops in blood sugar because they're insulin resistant tend to have less energy. If you have less energy, you're going to exercise less, you're going to move less, you're going to burn less calories. They also get hungrier faster. If you are hungrier more often, you're going to eat more calories. Therefore, you're going to get fatter more quickly, which is going to contribute to you becoming even more insulin resistant, which is going to make you feel even more lethargic and make you even hungrier faster, so that you're going to eat more and move less even more. You're going to get fatter again even faster. It's a vicious cycle that tends to feed into itself oftentimes. And again, this is particularly true when you're sedentary. And once you're sedentary and obese, and you're consuming fructose, you're consuming saturated fat in large amounts, you're combining all these factors together that just tend to steamroll and build on top of each other and create a synergy that leads towards a faster acceleration in the gain of body fat, a faster acceleration in your insulin insensitivity, a faster acceleration of the storage of fat around your organs, which in turn damages your organs more. All of these things just keep compounding and feeding into each other until they spiral out of control. And then you have people who weigh 300, 400, 450 pounds who are now sedentary, obese, insulin resistant with visceral fat, becoming diabetic, predisposed to all types of new cancers at a higher rate now, heart disease, everything else. It is this whole combination of factors together that feed into each other. So it's not just saying, hey, this one factor as far as your overeating causes it. It's that these different factors feed into each other and create a synergistic effect that contributes to these things in an extremely negative way. But it's not to say that automatically everyone who's overeating is going to have organ damage and liver damage from it. It is very much going to depend upon how physically active you are and the specific types of food that you're eating. I still go back to the point, and this has been noted though, very, very athletic people still seem to be resistant to some of these things, no matter what, meaning particularly like the hepatotoxic effects of excessive fructose intake. We don't have exact numbers for athletes, but there are athletes out there, extreme athletes, who consume more than we know causes these problems in sedentary people who don't seem to be displaying the medical symptoms. So extreme amounts of physical activity itself seems to blunt the negative effects. But we're going back into another synergistic effect again there. We've also noted that people who are sedentary are also, what's the term I'm looking for? The sedentariness itself exacerbates the negative effects of the fatty liver. So it's not just a one-way thing that one's causing the other. Again, we're getting it going back both directions again, meaning the physical activity itself, or lack thereof, tends to make people more sensitive to the negative effects that happen, even though the negative effects that happen themselves are reduced with physical activity. So again, vicious cycle. In other words, if you're sedentary and you don't exercise and work out and you consume a lot of sugar, and I don't mean sugars as everyone defines them as just simple carbs. I mean specifically these refined sugars high in fructose, table sugar, high fructose corn syrup, all that stuff. If you're sedentary and you consume these in significant amounts, you're absolutely going to set yourself up for fatty liver. It's only going to be a matter of time, a matter of years before you have the liver of an alcoholic, even if you don't drink alcohol. That seems to be the biggest factors there. And that is true organ damage. That is true damage. It is really going to negatively affect you, your health, and your quality of life over time. But the real question, I guess, becomes, because this is a fitness-related channel and a fitness-related question, how much are people going to be prone to this who are very athletic and work out? The answer is we don't know. Being athletic seems to diminish the effect, but we don't know the extent of that. So as a general rule, particularly those of you who are bulking, gaining weight, trying to gain muscle, gain strength, everything else, I would say the best thing you could do would be to limit your intake of fructose and probably limit your intake of saturated fat. Those are probably going to be two of your biggest killers, in addition to fried foods and cooking with oils and things like that. General rule, when it comes down to it, less fat is probably a better thing to consume when you're trying to gain weight, gain muscle weight, for a whole host of reasons, everything from body composition to performance. But by that same token, I'd also recommend you need to stay away from the refined sugars. There's something you need to seriously limit, all of those things really, if you're going to gain weight for better athletic performance, better strength, things like that. It would just be a good idea in general to avoid those things. And a lot of that seems like common sense, but oftentimes it isn't. Because sometimes when people are saying, hey, I want to gain weight, gain muscle, it's just a free-for-all and they eat whatever they feel like. That is probably the worst time to do that, just for your overall health. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.